Hi, my name is Candace Remery, and I am presenting Chapter 27 of our COMM theory book titled Cultural Studies, and this theory is examined by Stuart Hall, who is the main ideologist in this theory, and basically, I have a little background for who Stuart Hall is. Stuart Hall is a Jamaican-born professor of sociology at the Open University in the UK. And with other scholars, Hall's main purpose is to attack mainstream communication research that is narrowly focused on discovering cause and effect relationships. Hall was persistent in rejecting survey research that focuses on body counts because Hall doesn't think that it's important to know statistics and percentages because he believes that they are cruel behavioral indicators. Basically explaining that he doesn't want to use, he doesn't base his thinking and ideology on percentage or statistics of people, as we hear so many statistics that we just automatically assume something is correct because of the statistics that have been researched about, but Hall is the opposite of that. He believes that the purpose of theory and research is to empower people who live on the margins of society and the people who have little to say in the direction of their lives and who are scrambling to survive. So he basically wants to be a voice for all different cultures and all different people, so that we can learn how to communicate through mass communication and communication in general by examining different cultures. Next, we have cultural studies. So what is cultural studies? What does this look like? What does this mean? And this is also indicated in the area of mass communication, how culture affects mass communication and messages that we receive, and how we receive them. So by this definition, this means that cultural studies is an innovative field of research and teaching that investigates the ways in which culture creates and transforms individual experience, everyday life, social relations, and power. So this, as though basically a little bit of background as to what this will look like for what cultural studies is, and we can kind of get an idea of what this will look like for this chapter and what we can base our ideas of cultural studies on. So, by looking at cultural studies in the mass media, we need to think about culture and what this means to us. What does culture, when we think of culture, what do we think of? Do we think of race? Do we think of gender? Do we think of countries? So we're just going to take a few minutes to just talk about what we truly think culture means to us and how that affects our everyday life and how we live. Now, we have both cultural studies versus media studies. So, this basically is, the cultural studies is defined as a neo-Marxist critique that sets forth a position that mass media manufacture consent for dominant ideologies. So basically we'll talk about Marxism a little bit later, but this is cultural studies. This is kind of another way to think about it, is basically an ideological way to think about how the mass media manufactures and shapes our ideas and the way we think about culture or the way we think about society and how we live, and how that affects our the way we shape and think about things. And talking about ideologies, basically what an ideology is explained as is the mental framework. Frameworks different classes and social groups deploy in order to make sense of the way a society works. So basically this means how we think, what we think about, what we like, what we don't like. It's the idea behind something that we base who we are and what we believe off of. So, with understanding how these two work together, we need to look at who we think controls the media. Who has control over what we say and think? Who shapes the way we think about things and why we think about them that way? Because we live in such a generation where media is everywhere. We are on social media constantly. We're on so many things that really we just are so attracted to and sometimes addicted to. It often leads to how we react in society and what we believe and the way the actions we take and the way we think about things. So we really need to ponder how we think about the media and how we want our ideologies to be shaped by the media. And if we do want them to be shaped, then who is the media being shaped by? Who is the authority over the media? So that is kind of just the difference of cultural studies versus media studies and how they are correlated. Now, like I said, we were going to talk about Marxism a little bit. So this is Stuart Hall's, his had a lot of influence by Karl Marx, but some of the things he was a little iffy about. So he talks about Marxism without guarantees. So basically, Marxism is the rich get rich, the poor get poorer. So Marxism is basically just a way, it's a foundational theology of economics and political structure. But basically, Karl Marx thought that, in our government and in our society, it just works the way to where the rich just accumulate more money because of different investments, and just the poor people get poorer. There's no poor people get rich, or, it's just those two classes of society that can, there's a huge gap between them. So basically explaining the gap, that's exactly what it is where there's this huge gap, and with the gap of these two, the two social classes continuing to grow and divide, there's not really a middle class anymore. It's either you're poor and that's what happens, or you are rich and you just keep accumulating more money. So with this gap continuing to grow, this ideology is that desperate workers will overthrow the owners and overtake a classless and create a classless society. So basically, people that aren't okay with this, aren't okay with the idea of different level classes, and that if I'm poor, that I'll never get rich, or if I'm rich, I'll never be poor. The ones who aren't okay with that will overthrow this, and they'll create a classless society. So, like I said, Hall was strongly influenced by Karl Marx, but he didn't believe that all relationships, economics, and political and social relationships were based on money. So he doesn't believe that, even though this is a theory of economics and power, and he was strongly influenced by Karl Marx, he believes that this isn't the main ideology and the foundation of culture. He believes that just because some of this may be true, that there is a gap between social cultures and classes, that not every single relationship, like I said, whether that be economic, social, political, that they are based around money. We are not cultures that should or are based around money. So, and in this, Hall kind of explained that he found that his physical appearance was often as important as his economic class and the way people reacted to him. So because he was, like you guys saw in the picture, he was darker skinned, people would perceive him as a class level, and they didn't even know who he was or his economic class. They just perceived him because of the way he looked and the way he was perceived in the culture, because of stereotypes and just things that we have perceived over the years that may or may not be true, but that's how people reacted to him, was by his appearance. So that's basically where him and Karl Marx differ a little bit, is because he doesn't believe that every relationship is based around money, because it's clearly also based around culture because of the way people react to appearance or the way we perceive ourselves, and that is by growing up in every different culture that we all have grown up in. So this also talks about economic determinism, which is the belief that human behavior and relationships are ultimately caused by differences in financial resources and the disparity in power that those gaps create. So that goes along with something Hall examined, was this belief that that financial resources are the reason as to where those gaps are created, and the rich get rich and the poor get poor. That's basically where that ideology comes from. And this also explains the hegemony, which is the subtle sway of society's haves over its have-nots. So this theory was introduced by the Italian political theorist Antonio Gramsci, and this basically is the subtle influence or domination over one nation or over another. So this may, which in America we don't see this as very common, because this may be because of the way other nations influence us, or the other way countries view the United States. So that mean that America has a lot of power. Maybe that's because we have authority, so we aren't as affected by this concept because of the authority America has in every single country over the world. So this explains also that there is a power struggle between culture, and if we didn't have a power struggle between culture, it wouldn't necessarily be a good thing, because we're all different cultures all have different ways of doing things and explaining things and competing, and we're all on a different level of how we live and react in our different ways of life. So this shows that there is constantly a power struggle because one nation is always competing over another nation to be the best. But this is a good thing, because then we are able to kind of motivate each other to be better in culture. And this comes down also to the point that media has the power to affect culture. Because there is a power struggle. We call this a culture war, which is just clashing ideologies and clashing differences and opinions of different cultures. We can look at the way, we run things in America and we have a democracy, versus where in a country, let's say China, where they have, communism and socialism, we think differently. So naturally, in our cultures, in our different countries, we're going to react differently to different things. But if different cultures exist, there has to be passionately a conflict between the cultures. So that creates this culture war, which is a good thing, because then we can also look at how we today in our society, how we are affected by culture. And a lot of this has to do with the influence of media. So in this hegemony ideology, Hall, which he was the director for the Center of Contemporary Cultural Studies at the University of Birmingham in the UK, Hall articulated two different things. One was speaking out on oppression, and also to linking that subjugation with the communication media. So by articulating, which this is he interpreted this by two things, which is articulating as a process of speaking out on oppression and linking that subjugation with media representations and the work of cultural studies. So basically, how do we deal with the power balance in society, and how do we deal with articulating things like speaking out on oppression and how that affects communication media, how we can influence this. And one of Hall's aims was to unmake the power balances in society. He says that the cultural studies approach is valid if it deconstructs the current structure of a media research establishment that fails to deal with ideology. So he also wanted to liberate people from an unknowing acquiescence to the dominant ideology of culture. So basically explaining that Hall placed less emphasis on rationality and more emphasis on resistance. So he believed that the truth of cultural studies is established by its ability to raise our consciousness of the media's role in preserving the status quo. So what this looks like is media with trends. There's constantly trends, different things we see in the media. And we are constantly affected by this. So Hall's goal was to place more emphasis on how we can speak out about these issues and not be influenced by just the status quo, what's the normal, and that's what is normal and that's what's right, versus we are all different and all cultures are different, and that by evaluating if we can understand the way media plays a role, and we can be conscious of that, then we can understand how to overcome maybe situations where if something steps out in the media where it's unethical or doesn't value our morals that we have, that we can not feel like we're stuck in this slump of not getting out because it's just what the norm is, it's just what the status quo is, that we can have a voice. And that's what Hall's passion was, to have a voice for those, like I explained earlier, to have a voice for those that aren't maybe looked positively in a class society, so that we can understand that all those, no matter what race, gender, ethnicity you are, that we have a right and a voice to say what we believe in and what the status quo may or may not be, and why the status quo is what it is. So this is explained, which is meaning through discourse. So this kind of leads into that, because this is how does the media affect this. So broadcast and print media present a variety of ideas, but they tend to prop up the status quo by privileging the already accepted interpretation of reality. So like I said, when there's a trend, when there is a common knowing of some sort that this is what happens, is the media just takes it and goes with it. They just go with what they think is the status quo, and then they promote that. They don't look for things that may or may not be the status quo. They just they broadcast, like the media broadcast the status quo because this is mainly for financial reasons, because they just want more money, and we see what the status quo is and what the trends are, and then people just automatically go after those trends. This is also a result being that the role of mass media turns out to be production of consent rather than a reflection of consensus that already exists. So basically this is explaining that no matter people that are in control of the media that has authority and who is in charge of the media, which is why I thought it was so important as to why we look at who controls the media and what this looks like. Because when the broadcast and print media are representing the status quo, it turns out to just be something where consent just takes in and people don't have a say, and it's a reflection of consensus that already exists. It's just a production of consent that we haven't agreed to. It's just a sense of this is what's right and this is what we need to believe because that's what the media or that's what society says. So Hall believed that the consent-making function of mass media is to convince readers and viewers that they share the same interests as those who hold the reins of power. So, as we see in so much of media, we, in commercials and TV, if we see something that that may seem trendy or something that the media knows that will be the audience and viewers will be persuaded by, we believe the same thing as that because that just looks fun or it looks cool or that seems like something that I would agree with. So then they're slowly drawing you into trying to believe everything that the media is trying to get you to just believe about them, and like they want you to be on their side. They want you to think the same ways that they think so that they can get revenue, they can get popularity. It's all for selfish reasons, and media only looks at this as just, the authority, we can convince you to believe something, and so then we can convince you to either buy it, pay for it, or etc. So the media's hegemonic influence has been successful, so this has affected workers to a level of unsatisfactory work environment rather than a positive change and passion to work hard. It's basically explaining that this is a issue where the influence of the media has kind of brainwashed us in a sense to where we think we believe the media and what they say that is right, but it really comes down to the heart, where if we think we're working in, like, for example, we're working at our job and we think that it's a good thing to work at, maybe let's say a job where they're promoting iPhones, for example. Even if this may not be an environment where we are being productive and we are seeing positive results, because of the trends and the popularity of the iPhone, then people are just naturally going to want to work for that, and they think that they're going to have an enjoyable work experience and be successful, but deep down that they're really just in an unsatisfactory work environment and they're not reaching their full potential because they don't have a passion to work hard, because the media is telling them what they like and what they should want to like versus what they actually do like. So this leads me to my next slide, meaning through discourse. So we have to think of where do people get their meanings, and people learn meaning and signs through communication and culture. So this brings me to my reference of there's a book reference in Stuart Hall's book Representation that says, primarily culture is concerned with the production and exchange of meanings, the giving and taking of meaning between the members of a society or group. To say that two people belong to the same culture is to say that they interpret the world in roughly the same ways and can express themselves, their thoughts, and feelings about the world in ways that will be understood by each other. So basically, this is explaining that culture is concerned with just the production and exchange of meanings, like Hall said, so that basically that because two people are from different cultures, that doesn't mean that they have to think the same way. And media interprets this as we all have to think the same way because we should all like this or we should all like that. And where do we interpret our meanings? We get our meanings from how we've grown up, where we've lived, what our culture has been. And so having a different ideology or having a different perspective or opinion about something is healthy. It's good to have, because versus someone who was born in a different culture, in a different way of life, they're naturally going to have different meanings and ideologies about things. So basically, in an example, Hall asks readers to to examine how we know what the meaning of something is. So he's an example of like, how do we know that a red light means stop and a green light means go? And this is because someone years ago had told him that. That's what those symbols mean. So that's just naturally what we know. So having authority over something allows us to have more power to frame meaning behind it than those that don't. So this is an example that I thought of is like, obviously we're gonna listen to Dr. Berger and like what he explains in comm theory class, naturally in classes that have communication theories in them, because he has the authority to give meaning to them, because we are his students. We're not the teacher, and he has done his research, so he has the authority to give us meaning behind what these things mean, and give an explanation behind different theories and things like that. So basically, him having the authority to do that allows him to shape our meaning and what we think about different theories, because he's done his research and because we trust him and he has the credibility to know what the meaning is behind something, rather than those who don't. So then now I'm going to pass out the activity that I have, which is finding the meanings behind something. And then the next thing is explaining that who defines the meanings between normal and not normal. So how do we think about this? Who decides the frameworks of our own interpretation? How do we know the meaning behind the apple, or the Starbucks, or the no smoking sign? Who told us that that's what the meaning of those were? And so that's because of our different cultures we've grown up, but we still understand the meaning behind something because it's universal. And so then it also explains the definition of discursive formation, which is the process by which unquestioned and seemingly natural ways of interpreting the world become ideologies. So these ideologies, which seems as natural ways to interpret the world, allowed people to have the right to make meaning behind something. The right to make meaning can give power to make others crazy. So it was explained that people who said, okay, you, like, for someone who has had, let's say, a past with, ADD or sleep paralysis or something where they are defined as not normal, who gets to define that, and who gets to say that they're not normal versus they're normal? And if they get put in, a mental hospital, then that can literally make them even go more crazy, because people are defining what they think that they're normal and they're not normal, versus like who determines the meanings behind these things. So the next thing is corporate control of mass communication. So Hall studied the atmosphere where human culture originates and examines the power relations and social structures. So this is studying the atmosphere in which areas like relationship development, influence, media effects, and more occur, and from which they emanate. So from which these, where do these human cultures originate from? Where do they come from? And examining the power relations and social structures, which means that culture reproduces social inequalities and keeps the average person powerless to do anything but live and operate within a corporized world. So the United States is a prime example of this, because everything that we hear and read in the news is produced by a corporation, which is what leads me to Disney. So Disney is the owner of, we have Hulu, the History Channel, A&E, Pixar, ESPN. So all of these things are affected by Disney. So whether we turn from ESPN to the History Channel, you're still going to hear the same bias, because and the same interpretation of things, because Disney owns all of them. So that affects that authority that Disney has affects the way that we see media, and the way that plays out into our lives, because because this is so many things are produced by the same corporation, it affects us in the long run. And culture factors in the news, this is explained by the corporate clout is a reason broadcast and print journalism support the status quo, basically explaining that the media controls what we get to know and see because of the influence and preference that gets viewers and ratings higher. So this is how the audience is persuaded and what they prefer. So ethnocentrism is reporters value their own country over others. They don't want countries to look bad. Source of news is broadcast and print news come from those who already have power. Reporters are going to the one who have credibility and information rather than those who broadcast and print news come from those who already have power. Reporters are going to the ones who have credibility and information rather than those who are a nobody in the public world. Objectivity is journalists have a commitment to report without bias or objectivity. This comes down to an ethical issue. This leaves room for both sides of the issue, the impression that the truth value of all ideas is equal. The next one is individualism, where Americans value individual effort because we are founded on being a self-made country. Those men or women who have freedom to become who and what they want. News reports would endure and highlight a rich person being here, not relying on the government for help. I use the example of Donald Trump because the media supports the government, therefore is going to display our God-given freedom, not violate it. And the next one is the democratic process. Reporters are committed to democracy because the belief that Americans will elect better representatives in government if they honor the public's right to know and reveal corruption and conflict that is hidden from the public. Journalists can unintentionally create conflicting sides like pro-life versus pro-abortion or pro-choice. And Hall believed that the media hurt poor, working poor, or people of color because of negative connotation, like after the recession in Great Britain, because of just the negative connotation that was displayed. The next slide was the extreme makeover, which is the ideological work of reality TV. And this is the Extreme Maker Home Edition was a TV show that was focused on giving a deserving family that has suffered from trauma or misfortune and is deserving of restoration on their home or in their life. And basically the producers intentionally sought out all American families whose love and care for each other and moral character made it evident that they were deserving of the prize. So this is basically not for the actual people. This is convincing the audience that these are deserving people. So the real work that is done is on the audience rather than the house. People feel good because the viewers feel good because it gives them hope that there are still good people and good things happening in the world, which leads to a mini morality play suggesting that wealth only goes to those who deserve it, and the idea of popular culture, which is the power struggle between the haves and have-nots, which we talked about earlier. And the last thing was the impact of audience, which is although the media presents an interpretation to the media of human events, is not a reason to assume that the audience will take the ideology and the way the media wants them to. So the decoding options of the audience interests are 1, operating inside the dominant code, which is the media produces the message and the masses consume it. 2, applying a negotiable code, which is the audience assimilates the leading ideology in general but opposes its application in specific cases. And 3, substituting an oppositional code. The audience sees through the establishment bias in the media presentation and mounts an organized effort to demythalize the news. And this leads to the pessimism of the intellect versus the optimism of the will, which Hall stated that the pessimism of the intellect is the doubt of belief that the powerless can change the system versus the optimism of the will, which will expose and alter the media's structuring of reality. And the media playing field that will never be quite level because of the influence media has on society. And just the way that the communication and the media can impact the audience to different trends and different cultures. And then I would show my clips of Diversity Day in the office, and then I would be done with my presentation. So one thing after my lecture I realized that I need to just kind of slow down, and instead of pouring out all information in one just one blurb, I need to slow down and just really be intentional to pick out the important things and then let the students kind of just intake those and ponder those versus just pouring out all this information that it's gonna go in one ear out the other. The second thing was obviously the computer. Dr. Berger, I'm sorry that it just died in the middle of it. But I think that I try to do my best job to really just not go as much off of the slides and just have my sources and my information and kind of my outline and already have it invested in my mind and just how I'm going to present it to the audience. I think one thing that I need to focus on is not getting stuck in the middle of my sentences. I think if I just slow down and kind of take the time to explain to them what I think is important and what I don't think is important, that they'll be able to take that in better than to just, just hear me stop in the middle of a sentence and then I sound confused and sound like I don't know what I'm saying, when in reality I just am talking so fast and explaining so much information that I just get stuck in my own mind and my sentences. I thought that by the end I kind of started rushing a little bit just because I want to have time for my other activities and I want people to just be able to talk about things. And so I think just kind of eliminating things. I don't need to go through every single thing that I found or everything that's important in the book, just kind of highlighting those main things and focusing on them. And just talk, like I said, talking a little slower. I hope I don't say like. That's my main hope and prayer. So that's going to be a main focus for me. And then just focusing on what Stuart Hall said and finding other opinions of this and how kind of this affects mass communication, because I love working with media and mass communication. So just trying to focus on what cultural studies is and how diversity plays into it and how we are affected by what cultures we have grown up in and what that looks like for us living our everyday lives out and how we are so affected by society. So I think that hopefully my activities will go well and that it'll all kind of tie together. I was really trying to specifically just focus on highlighting what I thought I really got out of the chapter and what this can look like for me and just applying this to my everyday life. And that I can just be able to take these things and that students can take the things that I've said and that I will just be able to communicate clearly and just focus on what is important so that these students can get the main points across of what how important this theory is and the intelligence and just the things that Stuart Hall brought to the table and just the new ideologies that were spoken across about them. So I think for my critiques, just not saying like and focusing on just slowing down, saying the main points, and just really clarifying my meaning and what I'm trying to get across in a sensible and understandable way. So I hope, like I said, I'm sorry about the computer, but I hope everything else is good, and I hope that I'll be able to just glorify God through this and that people can understand my intention and just the ways that we communicate and that this makes sense. So thank you so much, and I will see you in class.